Ken Clarke was once hailed as one of the top 10 jazz piano players in the world. He was not only known for his catchy songs and his Ray Charles-esque voice, but also for his genius skill at playing the piano. Critics everywhere would comment on how you never heard his hands touch the keys. Well, this was remarkable, considering the size of his hands. He was no small man. He had long, skinny arms and legs and a big, big belly.
Ken's quite a hunk of a man. How tall are you, Ken? I'm 6'5".
Ken Clarke had a big personality, too. And he was my grandfather. Ken was a late addition to our family. He married my grandmother, the woman I'm named after, Tika Shedeker, a widow with 3 small children.
How I met Ken was really interesting. Mama was telling me about this fantastic musician they had heard. And within days, oh, Patricia, this is the musician I was telling you about. And that was Ken. He sat down then and started playing the piano.
It wasn't love at first sight for her, but rather first sound. And after some heavy wooing on his part, he finally asked her to marry him. And she said yes. He was, after all, a famous musician.
This one is called A Theme for Tika. It's an original.
I have never seen or heard anyone who could play as beautifully as he did, and it was such a tremendous sound. You just don't hear, because I've listened to a lot of well-known pianists, jazz pianists, etc., and most of them play almost one-handed. There isn't any of the depth that Ken had with his.
My mother, Charlotte, first met Ken when she was 10, and from the very beginning, he made quite an impression on her.
We had been raised at the beach. We had swam in the ocean all of our lives, and Ken comes down to the beach with fins and goggles and a life jacket. and we're like, oh my God.
Ken never made the big time. And if you do a Google search on Ken Clarke, the piano player, you're not going to find much. But all the big names in jazz and in Hollywood from the 1950s to the 1970s, most who have passed away by now, either played with him or they watched him play.
Frank Sinatra, Joey Bishop, Elizabeth Montgomery, Richard Boone, Ferroni and Teicher, Mike Connors, and Liberace. And he would say, God, if I had your talent or you had my showmanship, what a combination that would be.
Ken Clarke started out to be a serious musician, studying originally with Joseph Levine at the Juilliard School. His music studies were interrupted during the war when he served in the Navy for 4 years. Incidentally, Ken was on the Wasp when she was sunk, one of the few who survived that terrifying ordeal, and for 15 days he was on a raft with 2 others.
The funny thing is, nobody really knew who Ken was. He didn't go to Juilliard, and nobody can seem to vouch for him ever being a war hero either.
After a while, you know when somebody is not telling the truth. And the terrible thing was, with the talent he had, it should have been enough.
The only thing anyone has ever been certain about was Ken was a big guy, and he was great. Maybe he was a Baron Munchausen or a Paul Bunyan, or a man who felt he needed his stories to be as big as he was. Ken played the clubs every night. He never missed a show, until one night he called in sick and said he just didn't feel right. Ken Clarke, that big guy, died the next day of a heart attack at the age of 58.
I have thought so much about Ken and his music, and I think how much I miss him being with me And just listening to him, God, he would play the piano day and night.
My grandfather was bigger than the universe in my 6-year-old mind. And when he played in front of a packed house, he'd have me sit there on his lap while his hands rolled across the keys. I was so proud to be his granddaughter.
And he absolutely adored you children. I kind of think that he spent his whole life waiting to be a grandfather and then didn't have much time to be one.
Ken always told his family that he was rated one of the top 10 jazz piano players in the world. But after he died, we found out that he was in fact among the top 5.
Just a feeling I know. A beautiful
This is Tika Ballas and Ken Clarke at KRUA 88.1 FM, Anchorage.
loving you. I wonder, my beloved,